I know I promised this video a few days ago, but I ran into a few problems that I hopefully have sorted out and can try to explain through the video. This is one of the dangers of Grasshopper, and one of the reasons why I hesitate sometimes to teach it is you can get lost. Like I spent all day yesterday trying to fix this problem, which turned out to be something very simple. And that's unfortunate, but that's the reality of these tools, is sometimes it takes a long time to figure something out, but hopefully it's a lesson learned, and hopefully I can convey it to you. So last time we left off, we had dealt with a running bond and were able to apply it to a surface, which is kind of where we're at here. And we had this Grasshopper definition. What we're going to try to achieve today, and I have another Grasshopper definition that I've been working with here, is to use an image to start creating some rotation, or use the rotation, to use the image to start giving us some variation in the wall, let's say. This wall is still based on that surface, so I'll show you how I've gone through all of these, but this has some control over it where I can begin to vary the rotation, and believe it or not, you can kind of see that image as it moves through there, but we'll look through it. One of the problems I ran into, and this is what I ran into, and it took me a long time to figure out. Well, this is not the only problem, but another problem I ran into is that the system I was using to generate this was causing the bricks to move in the Z dimension, which I didn't want them to do. The bigger problem that took me all day to figure out, I'll try to explain as I move on. Hopefully this makes sense as we go through it. So I'm going to try to take you step by step. So we'll go back to where we left off, which is here. And I'm going to change it to a regular plane surface. When you're really trying to figure things out in Grasshopper or anything related to this, you want to do it step by step, and you want to do it without too many variables. And that's kind of what I've been trying to teach you guys through the trimester. So in this case, we're going to start with just a normal running bond, and to see if I can get an image to respond to the rotation. So the component we're going to use is called an image mapper. And let's take a look at that and try to understand that a little bit before we go on. The image mapper is up in params under input, and this takes an image, obviously, and we can do things with it. Let me load one up and I'll try to explain. So to load it up, we'll just double click here, and we have a bunch of options. The first thing is to find the file. I have a few, and I'll show you in a second how I make these. I'm going to start with something simple. So this is just some lines. I'm going to just pull it in right now so we can take a look at it before I make any adjustments. So what the image sampler does is, what we will use it for anyway, is we will take a value, a brightness value of any pixel that we sample within this image, and that will give us a numeric output. And then we're going to map or use that numeric output to an action that we want to use. So if I come back into here, we have all these options, all these channels that we can use. In our case, we want to use just the brightness channel. So we're just concerned about the grayscale value, black being 0 and white being 1. We also have what's called a domain. This is the numbers that it's going to sample over. So as it moves across the image, anything within here will have a value of, to the left will have a value of 0, and to the right a value of 1. This is not what we want. We want, at the very minimum, take the pixel dimensions of the image, and I'll show you again. You can notice these are values that we've used. We're going to change this again later, but I'm going to leave it like this for now. All right, so I'm going to say OK. Now let's take a quick look at how I'm making these. It's very simple. I'm just in Photoshop. I'm going File, New, and I'll start with a simple one. You can see I've already done one here, and I'm just keeping the same proportion. So I'm using 700 by 300 pixels. Obviously 7,000 by 3,000 would be a monster image, and we don't need it that big. So I'm just starting there with a new file, hopefully, yeah. And then I'm using the gradient tool to generate the gradient that I want. So using any of these gradient formats, in this case, let's just start here. Whoops. I can create a gradient where I'm going to have a value of 0 for black and 1 for that, and a variation in between there, like 0.5 would be the middle range. All right, so that's how Grasshopper interprets these images. So as we move through this and we start to use an image as a design tool, you have to actually start designing this gradient. But I'm going to start with a simple one so we can start to understand what's happening, how we're using this data to generate something. All right, so what it needs as an input, it needs points to sample. And where I ran into problems and what took me an entire day is those points have to be flat on the XY plane. So in essence, we could begin to build this on the XY plane, or at least make sure that we have a second set of points that are sampling on the XY plane. I know logically for me it made sense. I always thought that I was sampling here, but what happens here is our X, this is using X and Y values, so like say 0 to 1, whatever. So it'll map the points on here as if you were mapping it. I like to picture it like I'm mapping it on the wall. But any Z values, this image sampler ignores. It only uses X and Y values. So I was using points that had an X and Z value but had no Y value. So in essence, I was just sampling a single line along the bottom here and getting very mixed results. And it took me an entire day to figure that out. So the moral of the story, make sure, just imagine this image map is mapped to the XY plane and our points will sit in there. So to make that happen, we're going to do something quite simple, quite clever, and if you think about it, but it's going to cause us to have to make a couple alterations into our current setup, right? Into our current Grasshopper definition. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take this plane, and I'm going to rotate it. I'm actually just going to make the plane sit at 0, 0, sit in that positive X and Y surface. This is going to cause all kinds of problems, right? Seemingly at first, because our contour was taking a surface and contouring it based on a directionality, or normal that's defined, right? I need to change that. I want to change my up to now be the Y. This is X, Y. We were using Z for up, but I want to tell it to contour now in the Y direction. So I'm just using a unit Y vector. It's under vectors, and changing my normal. And that's basically telling the contour to now work along the surface of the plane that way. So that works well. All right? But if we look closely, let me hide this now. My bricks are the wrong orientation. But before I fix that, we can also remember that we made a plane in here, and that's what was allowing us to change the directionality as we made the surface curved. If I show this. Right, so we were using planes that were parallel to the XY. We now need to change that. So we actually want a ZX plane. We want our plane to be the same orientation of the wall. So I'm going to come back to my plane and get an XZ plane. And I'm going to replace this plane here with this one. And I'm doing this first for a reason, because this is defining also how our bricks are being made. Notice how the bricks shifted, so they're still the right size. If you were to do it the opposite way, it would look like the bricks would remain the same way. So I'm doing it this way, and everything else remains fine, right? Otherwise I would have to change these parameters and a few connections here, but because I just changed that plane right there, everything's nice and easy. So we're kind of right back where we were before. And for fun, and to maybe get myself in trouble, let's test this. So let's rotate this one. Also the same. Oops. Kind of went upside down. Let's move it based on that endpoint to 0, 0. And let's see if we replace this surface with this other surface. Since it was already selected, it's doing it. If everything works. And it looks like it does. That's nice. All right. Very good. So everything's fine. So I'm going to go back to the simple surface because I want to make sure everything is working. I can troubleshoot it much easier when I have a simple surface. And then if that all works with the simple surface, going back to the more complicated surface is as simple as the way I just did it. All right, so we're back to the running bond. All right, We also want to now take, notice I took the image mapper off. Let's put it back on. Maybe I never had it. I've gone through so many edits at this point that I don't know where I am, but all going to be easy for you guys. All right, so I have my image sampler. I'm going to pull in my image that I had. I believe I showed you how to do this. And I'm going to set this here, but what I'm going to actually do is try to get it to use units that are similar to the wall. So I'm going to have it use 7,000 by 3,000, and hopefully we'll see that. Make sure you click here. I didn't do that at one point. That way we're sampling the brightness of these. And what we'll do, we'll get a panel to figure this out. All right, so the panel, if we put it on here right now, won't show anything. But let's take a look at the data that's coming out of our merge here. So this is essentially coordinates of the points with a directionality. They're the planes. So it's the origin of the plane and the directionality of it. So if we look through here, we should have no z values, and we should just have x and y values, which we do. Sorry, I'm not... and that's what we want. Those are the points that are going to be used in the sampler. So if I go to here, should have left my panel, bring it back. Now, if I hook up my panel, I should see a list of points with values. So what it's doing is it's taking the origin of that plane, mapping it as if this were x and y, and then wherever that point lies, it's returning a value of the brightness. So you can imagine our points mapped over this. You can kind of stretch this to be the right proportion if you want. So we have these points that are sampling all along, and it's giving us back these values. And the reason why we put in the 7,000 was to make sure it actually used all those points in the full dimension of that image. Right? So now I want to use those values, but notice their values are all below 1. They're between 0 and 1. So how can I use those values to my benefit? The answer is to use them to rotate a plane. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another plane, another xz plane. And the reason why we can't use this one is we've got to use the data in the same order that it's going through the image sampler. So the data, this is a list of data, a list of planes. We need that exact same list. So I'm going to come in and create another plane, another xz plane that's based on that data. All right, so it looks like it's repetitious of these planes, but it is a list of planes in a much different order because we've gone through and played with the order here to get where we were going. Right, so if I look down, they're still the same, similar planes, but now I'm going to use those planes and I'm going to rotate them. So I'm going to come back to plane, and I'm going to go to somewhere here, rotate plane. Right, so this needs a value. It needs a plane to rotate, which we'll give it. I'm going to hide these as we're moving along. And it needs an angle. Be careful with these. Grasshopper likes to think in radians. I have no idea what radians are. I mean, I kind of do. I'll have to look it up every time because I always forget. But I like to think in degrees. So I'm going to make it look at these in degrees. So we need a way to take these numbers and translate them into degrees that matter. If I rotate this thing at 0.7, it's not going to rotate at all. So we can do that with something called a remap. We're going to remap a set of numbers. So we're going to take all of these values as our input value, and we're going to remap them. And we're going to remap them based on, you can see nothing's really happened because the domains are the same. It needs a target domain. In essence, we're going to give it a range for it to remap. So we're going to say remap those numbers anywhere from 0 to something else. So in order to do that, I'm going to put in a domain, and that's just a range, or that's just a numbers in between two, right? So here's our start value, 0, which is what I want, and our end value to be something else. So what I'm going to do is use a slider. Started at 100. Let's actually make it go up to at least 200. And it's only because I've done this before that I know this. But that's going to allow me to adjust this domain. So it's now a set of numbers between 0 and 100. And I'm going to feed those into my target. And let's put our panel here. So now you can see it's taken those numbers that were already there and changed them to numbers now anywhere between 0 and 100. And as I move this, you can see those numbers will change and increase. So this in essence gives me like a scale factor of that rotation. It's really quite simply all it is. But now we can imagine those as degrees. So I'm going to feed that into my plane rotation. And what will happen is I can now, we can't see it here, but you see it up here where the white is. This allows that rotation, right? So quite simply, all I really need to do now is remap my boxes to those planes and zoom out. All right, so you can see, unselect those, based on my image, that it's not rotating the stripes here, and it's rotating the stripes there. And I can do the severity of that rotation based on this value. So it starts to tweak it and get to some strange effects. Right? So let's take this image now and put on a new one to see if it actually works. All right, and let's look at it from the top view. And there it is. So you can see changing my rotation will start to change that. So quite nice. And one more time, let's go to my more complicated image. I'll show you how I made this in a second. And there it is. Sometimes subtlety is a little bit better. That's why we have the slider. It allows us to change it, but you can see how it's mapped to that image. And just like anything else, once you have what you want, then you bake it out and begin to alter it and change it. Now, the final test, let's change this image back to something simpler, is to map it to the complex surface. Now, can I have two systems working at once? Can I have the push and pull, which is driven by that surface, with my rotation? Well, let's test it and see. All right, so I have my new surface. Let's go back to here, and we're going to right click, say set one surface, put it to that one, and let it think. And so yes, it's mapping it. Let me hide it. And let me look from the top view. Yes, it's rotating it with some variations. Look at my perspective. All right, let's test it again using that fancier image, and there it goes. But you'll see what starts to happen is it gets a little bit unrealistic, and this is where you have to be critical as a designer. You can't just come in here and say, oh yeah, of course that works. You have to start altering this, changing your rotation values or changing the curvature of the surface till you get what you want. And then of course, when you're happy with that, you bake it out, and there you have it. So I'm going to quickly show you how I made that fabric gradient image. It's actually quite simple. I did a Google search for fabric and image. This is what came up. I'm going to pull it into Photoshop, and I now need to do some manipulations to get it where I need it to go. So first one's going to get it to the right size, the 700 by 300 pixels. So I'm just going to change it without changing any of the proportions right now. I don't want to stretch it or distort it. So now I'm going to crop it to the right dimensions. So I want it to be 700 pixels. This is going to be pixels per inch, 300 pixels at 72, which is pretty much what it is. All right, so now I can kind of move this to get the best spot that I want. Let's just kind of grab it there, hit enter, and it'll crop it. There we go. All right, so that's not enough. We need it grayscale. So let's go to image mode grayscale, discard all the color. That's fine. Now let's go to image, and I just kind of keep playing with this until I get what I want. Brightness and contrast, because we want a big contrast between the white and the black, because we're using those white and black values to alter it. So I'll try to crank that up as much as possible. Not quite enough yet. Let's go to levels, adjustments, levels. All right, this is nice that I can pull this, and you can see I get blacker blacks, which is exactly what I want. If you pull it down, it'll brighten it up again, but you get more contrast. Let's just kind of leave it there. It's also got the fabric pattern in it. I don't need that. So let's go to filter, blur, and use a Gaussian blur. All right, so I can blur more or less. All right, because we're just looking for brightness pixel values. I don't care that we don't really want it to look like the fabric. We just want to use that. So I'm coming back to brightness contrast, getting a little bit more contrast again after the blur, and that's fine. That looks good to me. I'll save that out and use that image. So that's it. You design your own image, make it all happen. I hope the video flows. I don't have time to go back and edit it or even watch it, and I did a lot of edits, and hopefully it all flows and makes sense. If not, post a question, I'll answer it, but I'm trying to finish this so I can get it up and posted right away.